Hello, my name is Bor-Kothoki, and you are listening to your favorite podcast. It's called Bor-Kothoki, and Bor-Kothoki in Assamese means talkative. So we are here to just give words to our thoughts and just to anchor our thoughts. We have chosen poetry as a topic, and we'll try to stick to the topic as much as we can. Today, I have a guest whom I recently met online through a wonderful community called Toastmasters, and she's right now joining from Florence, Italy. Her name is Amber Katrina Pate, and she's also interested in poetry. So, welcome, Amber, into Bor-Kothoki.
Thank you, Pramatesh.
Yeah.
It's
How's the weather? First, before I go into any other question.
Today is sunny, cloudy, but the sun is winning. So, okay.
Yeah. So we hope to have a good conversation.
No, I think it will come to rain maybe tonight, but
Okay.
I've been to the top of the mountain this morning with my brother, visiting a friend, getting back in touch with nature, back in touch with the places where I grew up, and that always fills you with good vibrations.
Okay. Talking about vibration, le- tell me, how did you start getting interested in poetry?
Okay. When I was a child growing up, my father would not allow us to have the television. We could watch some films on videocassette that he brought, but we did not have a television for the first years of my life. Also, as a child, whenever I would get sick, I had to stay in my bedroom until I was feeling better. If I got up and wanted to sit on the couch, my mother would conclude that I was fit enough to clean up the house. But my mom, she taught me how to read and write when I was 4 or 5 years old already. She used to teach us, then we got the Narnia books by C.S. Lewis.
Okay.
So I would hide in the garden reading C.S. Lewis, and I actually think that my interest in poetry comes from the book The Horse and His Boy. I think that's where it started because of the way that the Calorman people would express themselves in telling stories. And the Calormen, I believe, are actually the Turks in in C.S. Lewis' mind.
Okay.
So yeah. Wow, I had never thought of that. It came up now. Interesting.
See, expressing your thoughts can lead you to thinking new ways to look at things. So you get new perspectives whenever you speak.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. But then actually I started writing poetry when I was I think 12, between 12 and 14, because I had got the measles and I was very sick. So I was in bed and I was reading the book Shogun.
Okay.
And of course, that's all about Japan. And there's these short Japanese poems in there. So I think that's where it actually started. When I started actually writing my own.
Okay. So that's pretty impressive. First, you are only 12 years old, and second, you were sick because of measles, and at that time, you started writing poetry. So it is quite unusual, yeah, because when you are not well, are not able to think properly. So that's quite an interesting thing.
Actually, this memory came back to me because the other day on Facebook, Paul O'Mahony, who joined us on the who was on the second event of Begin with the End in Mind with us in June, he posted about the book Shogun. And
Okay,
I remembered that the night that I finished that book, if I start reading a book, I can spend all my time reading the book and I will finish a very big book in just a few days. And I remember that morning I had read the book all night long and it was still just a little bit dark and it was the crack of dawn and I was standing out in the vegetable garden of the family up on top of the mountain where I just went this morning and
okay,
watching the sunrise. So yeah.
yeah. Perhaps the that moment also helped you to think about some poetry.
One of my poems, very short, does talk about a crack of dawn. Yes.
Okay. So I haven't read the book Shogun. Is it about haiku?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So,
it's the book. The book is about this British sailor, captain of a ship. His name is Blackthorn. Right now, they are making a whole TV series on based on the book, and
okay,
he and his crew get shipwrecked. I believe. Well, if it's not exactly shipwrecked, but they reach Japan,
okay,
and they're the barbarians, of course, and the Japanese way, style of life, and honor code really start getting into him, and he pretty much embraces the Japanese way of being. Yeah.
okay. I guess that book is also very intriguing because it sparked mm, sparked what you say a inspiration for you to start writing poetry.
Yeah.
Did it help that the poems were small, so you could just uh, take it like in a, what you say? It was easier for you to write.
I don't know if I am actually like I do poetry my way.
Okay,
But for example, one of my very short ones is black tears fell from my heart, breaking the sorrow of my pain. The silence of my pain. Sorry. Sorrow is in a different poem. I get them mixed up sometimes.
I
Black
can,
tears fell from my heart, breaking the silence of my pain. Yeah.
it's
Very
quite
short.
deep. So I was just wondering, like, why do you think that poetry is important in us? Because our audience is mostly general people who
Mm,
may or may not be into poetry.
mm.
So, and the goal of this, I mean to say, the aim of this podcast is to make them engage in poetry. So, why do
Okay.
you think it is important to uh, engage in poetry?
Well, I think poetry helps us to express when we do not have our own voice.
Uh,
We cannot speak up about situations that we are powerless to change, maybe. Poetry is a way of expressing ourselves. It's also a way of learning language better because
okay.
you're looking for the perfect word to express that feeling. And it can be anything. I don't think poetry has to necessarily be all about rhythmics, metrics, rhymes. um, Poetry can be both very stepped, like for example, I still remember the piece of poetry I brought to my junior high exam, which is Italian. And it says, well, the first part says, Vostra Eccellenza che mi sta in cagnesco per quei pochi scherzucci di dozzina, e che mi gabella per antitedesco perché metto le birbe alla berlina. Or senta il caso avvenuto di fresco a me, che girellando una mattina capito in Sant'Ambrogio di Milano, quello vecchio là, fuori di mano. So practically, when I brought it to school, when I recited this at school, I surely did not recite it the way I'm reciting it now. I did it very much more like okay. But then when you learn that poetry is about expressing an emotion and that you're actually having a conversation with someone, that's when the expressiveness comes in. And this
Okay.
poem really reflects me because it says, "Your lordship, your lordship who is angry at me because of my verses, and you think and you want to label me as being against the Germans because I am exposing them for who they are." Okay, this was when Italy, the northern part of Italy, was under German rule. Um, not Hitler, way before that. Okay, and so practically it says, now listen to the story that happened to me when going around one morning. I came to this church of Saint Ambrosia out close to Milan. Okay, so that's a very poor translation right now. But practically, um, like lots of times poets are the rebels. They
Okay.
expose the truth of the oppression from the invader very often, or
Mhm.
else they would go around writing against the government. Okay,
Mhm.
but so poetry really helps you to express a lot of things, and then you have a like poetic license, so you can actually kind of get away with certain things that you would not normally be allowed to say. uh, as as a young teen, for me, starting to write my own poetry was very important because in my family I was pretty much scapegoated a lot. We
Okay.
had yeah, was a very unhealthy environment, let's say. On the one hand, beautiful, wonderful memories, like in all narcissistic interactions. There's the wonderful, fantastic parts, and then there's the parts where you just want to die. You just want to have it over with. And so starting to write in, like, then after all, everybody, what we own, everyone just wants to be loved, right? So being able to express that in your poetry, in your verses, and then you never have to really say who the poem is about, right? It's some form of liberation. And it also allows you to tap into your creative side as well as your intellectual side, because you have to be uh, quite intellectual in order to become creative. That's something that people don't seem to understand very well. But yeah, so I think it's very important, if people feel frustrated, poetry can be very helpful because you can just put it all out on paper. You don't have to be keep, like, if you write a diary, maybe people will come and steal it and look into your diary, right? But if you write it in poetry and you use it and you kind of encrypt your emotions in the poetry, people who don't know you, they will not realize what you are talking about. Not really. It's also a way to keep safe, let's say.
Yeah. So I got 2 points. One is that poetry is a kind of encrypted expression, and other thing is that it's also a sign of rebellion. It's not just a rebellion uh, to the government, but also a rebellion within ourselves also.
Mm,
Because the way you said that, it's like we are also going through a struggle and always fighting within our different parts of the brain, you can say. So the poetry helps us sort out this struggle, and we can say that this is the happy emotion, and we want to write something about this. This is the troubled emotion. We write, and we can sort it out.
yeah.
So
Like there's times where you're traveling and it's like whoa, and you it's just it comes to you automatically. Now, one example, people say that oh, it took us ages and ages. Well, okay, I believe in the Bible, and in the Bible, God creates Eve and presents her to Adam. And Adam immediately uses poetry when he says, "This is finally flesh of my flesh and blood of my blood," or bone of my bone. I get things mixed up.
mm,
But, right, it's poetry what he says.
yeah,
So it's everyone has that innate way of expressing themselves. I mean, that has the innate capacity for poetry. And very often that's also why we get mixed up, because maybe we attach a meaning, a specific meaning to a word in our minds, in our way of envisioning the world. And then we come across other people using that same word, but they mean something completely different.
yeah,
So it's also, yeah.
yeah. So you actually said something very important. That is, everyone is capable of uh, writing poetry, which many of us think that we are not good enough for.
Mm,
We are. It's something about intellectuals only.
mm,
But poetry is for everyone. Everyone can. make their own interpretation reading the poetry, or even if they write, it
Oh,
doesn't have to be like uh, to impress anyone else. It's just the expression of that moment. So,
I believe everyone has the capacity to be highly intellectual as well.
yes,
It gets kind of squeezed out of us when we start going to school.
yeah,
But if you look at children, if you listen to children, all children say these amazing poetic things. And they have these deep, deep observations about the world. It's only when they get confronted with adults who tell them, they come asking questions or they say something, and the adult maybe makes fun of them or tells them, shut up, they can't be bothered. That's when it starts going out. But oh, I remember things that my son and my niece would say. I could sit there and make these long observations. Peaches are hairy, but they're soft like velvet. So, like, having these deep conversations like that between each other, it's like these are two little poets,
yeah,
right? Now we go to school and we lose that capacity because we are taught that there's a right and a wrong way to do things. So, yeah.
yeah. Maybe we can get better and not start boxing thoughts into what is the right way to do things,
Mm,
because thoughts are very they have a wide range of uh, variety, and you cannot say that, like, even with emotions, you cannot say that this is happy, this is sad, and between the whole uh, what do you say spectrum of between happy and sad, there is a whole spectrum of emotions which may not have the right word, but we can express it through poetry by
mm,
mix and match of different words.
mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, then everyone has their own flavor of poetry.
Yeah,
That's also something. Like, I was
yeah.
listening to one person and it seemed like he was talking normally, and then I realized, no, there's a rhythm to what he's saying. And then I realized that he's telling a whole story of something that actually happened to him.
Okay.
But it's just like, whoa, okay, we have to really learn to stop and listen more and catch ourselves when we say something. Like, very often we don't pay attention to ourselves, but catch ourselves. Like, if we go back and we look at the things we wrote, for those who, like, sometimes we just scribble on paper stuff, but if, like, the amazing ways that we can actually be expressing ourselves, which we don't think much of. Like, all of us, I think all of us suffer from the syndrome of the fish
Uh,
who suddenly someone comes along and says, whoa, how are you managing to breathe underwater? And the fish is like, I'm breathing underwater. Oh, I'm not supposed to breathe underwater. And then it's like, no, I always did this. So most people are unconsciously competent.
yeah,
You know exactly, you know a lot of stuff, so you just don't know that it has been you just don't know that it has been formalized, and because you do not know the jargon of the universities or of the erudites, you don't know the jargon, so you think, oh, I'm ignorant. Oh, no, no, you know it. It's just you don't use that jargon. So it's Yeah, I think poetry really helps a lot with that too.
Yeah, and like as they say, everyone is an expert of their own life. So
Mm-hmm.
just trying to express themselves
Mm-hmm.
will help in writing a poem. It doesn't have to be what do you say, a dogmatic structure as has been prescribed by many people who are actually uh, known poets. But
Mm. Yeah, about that, like I don't show my poems very much to people, not very
okay,
often. There's a couple that I do. Um, some there's a handful, a very small handful of poems that I do, because that's another thing. People, like especially children are mean. Okay, and sometimes I would show some piece of poetry that I had written, and my siblings might find them or look at them and start laughing at me because ha 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 whatever, right? So that kind of puts the dampener on you. I believe that poetry is, yes, okay, there's nice to see the poetry, read the poetry that's out there, but I believe poetry can really be a personal practice for yourself, something for you, right?
yeah,
Something in this world where there's barely anything that's personal anymore. There's so many things, like places where people can come in all the time. Poetry is like almost like creating. It's like going into your own world,
mhm.
and just being able to find the beauty in your own world. Yes, the suffering. Yes, all of, like, yes, confronting difficult times, but also the beauty. There's some of my poems. They're about beauty. They're about sublime things. But it's you don't have to share everything with everyone, do you?
Yeah, the, even I agree with that. Like when I started writing poetry,
Mm,
it was not good, I would say. And even now, I don't consider myself a poet. But when I started writing online only, and no second drafts, no. But it helped me discover myself.
mm-hmm.
It's like telling only.
Mm,
You think that you have nothing to say to the world,
yeah.
but when you start uh, storytelling, you realize that there is huge expanse of stories that you have inside yourself because you have gone through different experiences.
Mm,
So there will be small anecdotes for every situation that you are telling.
mm,
So uh, you only realize when you start storytelling. So similarly in poetry, when you start exploring the that uh, world, you realize different emotions inside you, and
mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to be like what you say, something about the love poetry, or it can be anything. It can be just about uh, walking also, or it can
Yeah.
be like how you feel feeling sitting uh, uh, in your bed, and there's no one in the room. It can
Mm-hmm.
be about anything.
Yeah.
So those sporadic thoughts can be put into the paper, and that can be poetry.
Yeah. what I love also, okay, we've been talking about writing your own poetry. Personally, I find that poetry then, so the exercise for myself is one thing, but I also find that I can learn so much more by from certain poems. You
Yes.
can learn so much more, and they can serve really as a reminder, as a way, like, if, okay, for Christians, the Psalms, it's all poetry, but you can share very deep truths, very deep knowledge. And like when we did that table topic session together, and I brought Rudyard Kipling's If,
Mhm.
um, he is one of the poets that, like, that poem If really
Mhm.
is, it's my guiding star. It's a very short compendium, and sometimes I have to stop myself and say, Amber, are you still aiming for these?
Mhm.
Because it's always like he's giving you a list of qualities, of principles to build a solid character on, to be worthy of the title of man, and also to be worthy of the title of woman. Okay, but it's like mankind.
Yeah.
uh to be worthy of that title, I really do not like this talk about toxic masculinity. I don't like to talk about people inherently being inherently toxic, because each individual chooses for themselves and
Yes.
what they want to become. And our life is a constant becoming. It's a constant, either we are going up because we are elevating ourselves. The moment we stop, we are never stationary. We will automatically start reverting to things that are not good, that are not productive, let's say, that are not helpful. Um, so for me, just the other day, I was in a situation, and Kipling's phrase came to mind: be capable of walking with the kings without losing your humility, and be capable of walking with the common people without becoming corrupted. That's practically the translation into modern language, right?
Yes.
But like, if you have something like that that you can look at, and it can remind you to be aiming for excellence, I find poetry is very useful for that, for teaching and for reminding us of um, things that are higher than ourselves.
Yeah. And there is a like a there was a singer like out here. His name was Dr. Bhupen Hazarika. He had written songs on every topic you can think about. So he he had written songs about his feelings when he was sent as an ambassador of peace during the wartime, or as a mentor to fellow politicians when he was in politics, or uh, even love poems, or you think of any situation, he has written some song on it. So it also acts as an like a encyclopedia of uh, different kinds of uh, uh, situations he faced in life, or maybe it's also a kind of history, because every song has a history of its own, and every song uses different words. So that word also makes us think about what does that word mean, and that becomes part of our diction as well. So I
Mm-hmm.
think reading poetry also helps us learning the language, learning the culture, learning the history.
Yeah.
So you can learn different things by just reading different poems by. It's
Yeah.
not just about great poets, but even lesser known poets who have published themselves. So
Yeah. Um, in recent years, I began watching very by accident uh, Chinese TV dramas about empresses in the palace and
yeah.
those. Now, what I love about those costume dramas that they make, okay, some of them are really tacky, okay. But what I love about the ones that are done good is that they are constantly bringing in poetry, which is reciting principles to be teaching the other people in that situation. And you were
Mhm.
talking about songs. Songs, what are songs if not poetry with music added? So that's, yes, I absolutely love that. And it's um, precisely thanks to this experience of having come across this Chinese TV series
Mhm.
that I started like having like starting learning more about the Chinese culture, not so much the modern
Mhm.
society, which is pretty much the same all over the world, okay, but like their history, their heritage. So that's like wow, it's really interested me. And then it's something similar started happening with there. Like stay calm. No, first let's finish one side and then move on.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. So yes, and poetry teaches you many different things. Like even like you said, Bible was written as a poetry and in verses only. So and even if you look at all the other mythological books, they're all written
yeah,
in the form of poetry.
yeah.
So
Just think of
poetry has been the ancient form of what you say expression, not
yeah,
just the expression, but also passing the knowledge. So
right, yeah, yeah. And actually because precisely like it helps to pass the knowledge precisely because we remember we remember short phrases that are put together in certain orders. We remember those
mhm,
better. So
yes.
yeah, actually that's what I was just telling the kids yesterday, um not yesterday, on Friday, the kids from the youth leadership program.
Mhm,
um, we were covering how to prepare your speech and how to remember your speech. Write short phrases of 7 words. It's easier to remember a short phrase instead of a very long, very descriptive phrase. So
yeah.
for you to recall, yes, your own poetry as well. Mm.
Yeah, I completely agree. Instead of remembering the huge long paragraphs, you
Now
just
you can't remember those. It's very difficult.
you can remember 2 lines of poem and try to interpret it different ways.
Hmm.
Uh, and if you like some poetry, you can also like interpret in different ways in phases of your life.
Yeah, I
So
just think, oh my. Um, Talking about maturing, when I was in junior high,
yeah.
I wrote, it was more of a limerick, let's say, about all of my classmates.
Okay.
And it starts out, this is a poem about my classmates. In Italian it was, questa è una poesia sui ragazzi di classe mia. So there's the rhyme there, right?
Mhm.
And for each classmate there was a rhyme. And I was always so happy I'd written this because I really was so proud. I really, when I talk about my days, I am not talking about high school. I am talking about elementary and junior high, the classmates of my town. Okay. And so proud of it. And remember, though, that when I stood up in front of the class to read this, my professor was very proud of me. Our Italian professor, he was fantastic. He still is watching over us from far off. He lives in the area as well. But I found that poem again and I read it. And I thought to myself, oh my God, how could you write such things? Like, for me, it was just stating the obvious. But now that I'm grown, I can see how it could have come across as offensive. Like, as I was just so ashamed that you're like, oh my God, oh my God.
Mm.
So
Okay.
yeah, that's another thing. When if we go back and we look at stuff, we think, okay, see how I've grown. I would never say something
Yeah,
like that again. Yeah.
that was what I was saying that when I first started writing poetry, and if I go back and look at those poems, I find it quite silly and immature. Like, and I think that how could something like that? Like, if thinking was bad, then writing was worse.
No, I mean, if
Uh,
if we did not feel that way, if we did not realize that, I think it would mean we have never grown. Because we are not born to be experts. We are born to
yeah,
learn and then become experts. So yeah.
yes.
So yeah, it's like if we go and we look at, like, if I go back sometimes and find my, sometimes you're putting stuff in order, come across your diary. You the diary, like, oh my God, I was really ridiculous, wasn't I? The things I was getting upset about. Oh, how silly. But yeah, that's the new perspective. And then, but I think it's important we keep that, because when we are tempted to say, these youngsters, they're so foolish, if we have memory that,
Mm,
hey, I was the same, be patient. You know?
yes. Uh, that's a very important point that you made. Like, yeah, but there are a few poems that I really think was I think that those poems were good because I like those poems even now. I don't
Yeah,
think that it was a. So, do you have any poem with you that you like even after uh, so many years of writing?
there is one that I tend to write and dedicate to people I find extremely special, who I have crossed paths with. And yeah, and it says, golden flowers bloom every day in the garden of my heart. Joy and beauty in the freshness of the morning light. But in the evening, as the sun sets and the closing blossoms shine red, they weep their dew for those flowers which have not had more than one moment of life. I wrote it in Italian, so translating it to English is a little bit more.
Yeah, I understand that. Like, uh, when
Because
my poem was written, written in half broken uh, language, like, because at that time I did not know my own mother tongue. So
Ah, we
because
go through
I
the.
was I was staying in some other part, so not many of my friends were speaking my mother tongue. So uh, I wrote it that, but the purity of that thought is something that I like it. And if I translate it to English, it becomes like, I realized how beautiful you are in
Uh-huh.
my when I saw you in my dreams last night. So
Nice.
and I go on describing what are the features of that person is, and so
Mm, mm.
that is why I like that poem. Maybe like in a pure dogmatic form, it's not the perfect poem, but I really like the purity of this poem because
Yeah.
uh, it was something special that came uh, to me. It's because I was talking about a person whom I have not even met, and I was just uh, creating an imaginary person.
I have a
So
question. Now I have a question. Did you meet that person?
no, I did not mean it, but because I
No, did you meet them
created
later
that
in
person.
life?
Maybe sometime I meet that person, or maybe I have like I have a, what do you say, mm, idea in my mind that how should a person look, uh, whom I should call beautiful.
Okay. Right.
Because I created that person, it was something like, what do you say, something like I gave birth to someone, like, so it is special to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. It's almost a
Uh,
little bit like sketching with a
yeah,
pencil.
yeah.
I used to do that as well. Um, in the years that I was like, I don't write poetry very much anymore.
Okay.
Sometimes something comes for me, and then I will write it down somewhere, and then I lose it. I don't know where it is. Then I find it again because I have paper all over the house. But I also there was this one time where I was sketching a self portrait in
Okay.
pencil, and like I was doing it looking at myself not in a mirror, but
Hmm.
in the window, the reflection in the window, and the glass of that window was ancient, and so it wasn't perfect like the windows from now, so it was a little bit
Hmm.
wobbly, right? And it was like looking at myself in a distorted mirror. And so I finished sketching this and drawing it, putting all the shading in, and then I looked at it. I said, ooh, this one is ugly. It's me, but it's ugly. So I put myself there and I did it again. And
Yeah.
so the second one is softer. One is very, and the other one is softer. And because I have two names, I called one Amber and the other one Katrina. So practically, it's like welcoming the good and the bad inside of you. And I have both of those on my wall. I still keep them and I put they're up on my wall. I remember to remind me, of embrace both sides, even the sides of you that you don't really like, because only when we can embrace the part of ourselves that we wouldn't want to be there is when we can elevate it to overcome it. If we try to reject it without ever confronting it, without ever sitting down and talking with the ugly in us, the black in us, Then there's it's going to come and show up in the wrong moments. So it's important that we embrace both sides of us. It's also very hard when you have been bullied all your life to embrace the good of yourself. It's very hard to believe when someone says, "Oh wow, you're fantastic, you're amazing." It's very hard to believe that unless we do a constant exercise of telling ourselves without becoming arrogant, but telling ourselves, yeah, you did a good job here. Okay, now don't rest on your laurels. You did good here. Don't rest on your laurels. Today, tomorrow, you have to do it again.
Yeah.
So,
Now that you said about this, like embracing both the sides, like actually made me think about the poems that helped me address certain issues that I was facing.
yeah.
Even you spoke about your frustrations in life and how you expressed it through your poetry. So I think poetry also helps facing those things that you don't like. Uh,
Yeah. And like people who say, "Oh, I can't write." Well, start copying someone. Find someone that
yes,
you find some that one that really inspires you, and it's like the more time you spend in certain the more time you spend with someone you really like, the more you become like that person. But then you also start evolving. You stop being a copycat and you start bringing your own stuff to the table. So yeah,
yes,
that's because if you are ever inspired by a song, by a poetry, by art, by like anything, um, if you're inspired by that, it's because it's already in you. You could not be inspired by
yeah,
something that is not part of you.
yeah. That reminds me of another poem that tried to write. I won't say that I was successful in writing that, but it was a song that I liked and tried to write it in English, uh, and but it was not a complete translation. But because if you try to do it word to word translation, it becomes like a official discussion kind of thing. So mm, I tried to tweak it, and it became a completely different uh, poem. And when you say that try to copy someone, you actually, when they are trying to do that, you actually create something new.
Yeah.
So, and that is how we learn how to uh, create new stuff uh, as we practice ourselves and uh, become
Yeah.
better at that.
Yeah. One thing people think creativity is okay, there are definitely kids that are born gifted and they just go and do
Mhm.
stuff. But vast majority, it's you can only bring out what you put in. So, of
Yeah,
course, we all have different learning channels. We have different ways of absorbing information. So, maybe that makes a difference in how someone can then express themselves. But for poetry, for example, you have to actually be exposed to poetry in order to start bringing it out. Nobody is born with poetry. It's like language. It doesn't matter what
yeah,
nationality your parents are, wherever you grow up in the world, that is the language that becomes yours. And if your parents are speaking one language and with your friends you are speaking another language, your culture is completely different. It's a blend of those two cultures. So, but it's only because you are exposed to that environment that you bring out then the art,
Yeah,
the kind of art that you bring out. Because if you were not exposed to it, and then, as you said, then there comes the twist where you put your own twist on it. And this can happen very early,
yeah,
it can happen very late, it can happen consciously, it can happen subconsciously. Like some people, they don't even know how they did something. My brother,
yes,
he, he's really a painter, he's autistic. But when he paints stuff, there's all of these painters in the area who, like, they stand around and they look at his paintings and they say, I don't understand how he did this. He does amazing stuff, very simple, but amazing. And these painters, they're looking at what technique he did not use a technique. He absorbed it somehow. Okay. So it's,
mhm.
yeah. And some people say you need to go to school. I don't think so. You can absorb it from everywhere. Inspiration is all over the place, no matter where you are. And there, you are back.
Oh, sorry, my internet connection is very busy today. And so you were saying about that no one is like born talented, and I think that talent is highly overrated. And there is one a music producer called Rick Rubin. So he actually doesn't know anything about music, but he is one of the highest celebrated music producer. And not just that, he is a thinker. So, and he says that stop thinking art as something that has to be like put in a wall, like frame in a wall, or put in an exhibition, or some other place where people come and visit your art. Anything can be art.
Yeah.
So taking this thought process in poetry, your any of your thought can be a poem. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to think that I am not talented.
Yeah. Oh,
A
that's one of the
poem is
big.
inside you, and as you
Yeah.
said in the beginning, there is no right or wrong form of poetry. It can be of any form. Nowadays, we also have prose poetry. You can write in the form of prose as well.
Mm,
So you can try different things, and as you start exploring poetry, you will learn that the spectrum is huge. And
yeah. I mean, every person has their niche. Every person has their uniqueness. Um. So it's not about. Well, then forget about the poetry which is exalted and, as you said, the art. Then you have to go to the gallery. It's not like
mm,
you have to absolutely go and buy all kinds of. Some poetry is absolute trash for me, but it
yes,
means everything to someone else. My
yes,
poetry might be, I mean, it's the same as for our speeches. When we deliver speeches, some people are enthusiastic about them. Others are like, oh, that was so stupid. You know, just be you, be unique. Don't worry. Yeah.
okay. I see that our time is also coming to a finish. We did not uh, see how the last 1 hour was spent because we are speaking so passionately about poetry and without anything being planned. So, and
Yeah.
with your final thought that we are all unique, just be unique. I would like to thank you for being part of this podcast, and I hope that you come again in this podcast, and we will discuss more about different kinds of poetry that you like, and be more specific about the poems that we both love.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to chat with you on something completely different from what we usually do together. That's It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. I'll be
Thank
happy to
you.
come back. Yes.